Good morning, everybody. So on the 10th of November in 2001, I was in Cape Town at the University of Cape Town, and I just handed in my thesis the day before, and my boyfriend Richard told me that he was going to take me out for the whole day. What I didn't know is that he planned to propose that day. So because I didn't know that, and we were Christians, so we were trying to stay pure, but we were also young and healthy and athletic young teenagers, so we were trying to keep our hands off each other. It wasn't very easy. So I decided, because we were going to spend the whole day together, probably unsupervised for a lot of it, I should make sure to dress in my baggiest, most unsexy, unattractive clothing. So I did that. I put on baggy dungarees. I think when Richard picked me up for this day of romance, he thought, oh, you're not quite dressed for the occasion. But nonetheless, we drove all the way up the west coast of Cape Town to a beautiful beach, where from there we left the picnic basket in the car and we went for a long walk on the west coast white beaches. He knew that I loved walking on the beach, and so we walked a little bit too long, because after 2 hours of walking on the soft sand, my knees were so sore I couldn't walk back again. And so we ended up having to hitch a ride, but we'd walked a little bit around a mountain. So we couldn't just hitch a ride back along the coast. We had to go right over the mountain, a 1 hour ride, and the only person willing to give us a lift was someone with two shaggy, wet dogs in the back seat. And so because Richard wanted this day to be perfect, he put me in the front, and he sat with a big grin on his face, pretending he was having the time of his life. I later discovered he actually really did not enjoy being with the wet, shaggy dogs in the back seats. As we went back to where our car was parked. Take two. So now we went and found a different beach, a more secluded beach. Bring out the picnic basket, all my favorite treats. He'd told his parents he had an emergency and he needed to use their Woolworths card to buy things that we couldn't afford. And so we had some beautiful Woolworths treat, not the normal student food that we had. And it was the moment. And he reached into the cooler bag to get out the ring. And at that moment, our secluded beach suddenly became crowded as a busload arrived, surrounding us with noisy people running into the ocean and playing and laughing and screaming. And Richard put the ring back in and took a deep breath and said, let's try another beach. Well, by this time we had been in the sun for hours. I didn't want to go to another beach. I was all beached out. And so instead we found our way to Newlands Forest. And this was going to be the moment. So we're walking in the beautiful, cool forest. Rich lays the picnic blanket. He sits down. I lie down and fall fast asleep. And he has to wait. Well, when I woke up, now I've had literally the best day of my life. We managed to do that. I've had the beach, I've had the sun, I've had a walk, I've been with Richard, I've had beautiful food, and I've had a beautiful nap. I wake up, and he gets out this piece of paper, and he's written a poem, and his hands are shaking, and his voice is shaking, as he tells me all the reasons why he wants to marry me, and all the reasons why I should marry him, with the last line of the poem being, Jaci Mary Stott, will you marry me? So when someone asks you a question like that, a proposal like that, you need to consider, first of all, what exactly is being asked here. What is the proposal? And second, who's asking it, and can you trust them? So I didn't know everything about Richard at that point. I did not know that he did not enjoy the ride with the shaggy dogs in the back seats. I did not know that he did not enjoy long walks on the beach, which was a bit disappointing because he only told me that when we were married, and I do like that. And since then, I go for long walks on the beach on my own. But what I did know was that he was kind and generous, and I knew that he was that way not just to me when he wanted something, but to other people who would never be able to pay him back. And so I had enough information to know that I could trust the person asking, and that he was proposing a marriage of equal partnership and love and sharing a life together, and so I was able to say yes. You might be wondering why, if this is Pentecost Sunday and we're speaking about Pentecost, this message is going to be about Pentecost, why I would start with an opening story about a proposal. So what is Pentecost in any case? Let's read a verse that tells us in Acts 2, so the church is just about to be birthed. Jesus has gone up 10 days ago. He died 50 days ago, was walking the earth, resurrected, speaking to people for 40 days. Another 10 days they've now been waiting. And this Pentecost moment is the moment where the Holy Spirit comes down upon his disciples and fills them with the Spirit and enables them to go out and do what Jesus has asked them to do, which is to spread his message that he came to deliver to the rest of the world. And so in Acts 2 is the day, verse 1. It says, when the day of Pentecost had come, they were all together in one place, and suddenly there came from heaven a noise, a sound like a violent rushing wind, and it filled the whole house where they were sitting, and there appeared to them tongues as of fire, distributing themselves, and they rested on each one of them. Why am I telling a story of a marriage proposal on this day of Pentecost? Because what these people thought they were celebrating was a marriage proposal. The day that they were celebrating was the day that the 10 Commandments was given to Moses, given to the Hebrew nation, and they did not call it the day of 10 Commandments. They called it the day of the 10 word or 10 saying Ketubah. Marriage proposal is the translation of the Hebrew word Ketubah. So we've got a few questions to ask ourselves. First of all, if there is a proposal that God is making of us, then we need to know what it is and who's making it, what it means if I say yes. But second of all, we need to ask ourselves, why did the Hebrews, the Jews of that day, why did they think that the day they got the 10 Commandments was a proposal, a marriage proposal? Why did they associate it with that? We call it the 10 Commandments, not a proposal, and yet they called it the 10 word Ketubah. And so I want to paint a little bit of a picture of the day they got the 10 Commandments, that 10 word Ketubah, as well as to strand it, to plait it together with a Hebrew love story and maybe a little bit of Richard and my love story, so that you can understand why when they got to that moment, when they arrived at Mount Sinai and received the 10 Commandments from God, why did they feel that was a wedding proposal? And why all these years later, as the disciples gather on this important Pentecost day, why did they think they were still celebrating the Exodus 20 story of receiving the 10 Commandments? So, a Hebrew love story would follow 5 phases. They're not very dissimilar from 5 phases that we would follow. And so I'll try and link it together with what you may have experienced, or me, or some of the young people today. And the 5 steps go like this. The first step is called Lakah. So Lakah would be translated roughly to receive someone, to take someone as your own, a little bit like the moment where you say, be my Valentine, or be mine. Will you be mine? Will you be received as my own? So for Richard and I, we'll have to back up a little while. It wasn't the long walk on the beach, and it wasn't the time when I was napping in Newlands Forest. It was a little bit earlier. We were at university, and we were supposed to be studying. It was in the middle of exams. And instead, Richard sent me an SMS on our Nokia bricks. And the SMS said, at 9 p.m., would you like to take a study break and go for an ice cream with me? I had a clue that what that might mean, and I wouldn't have minded having a guy like Richard say Lakah to me. And so I said, yes, I would love to at 9 p.m. when I would ordinarily be going to sleep. Never mind about that. I'll choose to go for ice creams with you because you think I'm about to go and study for another 2 hours, which I'm definitely not going to do, but it's fun. Let me go for ice creams with you. And so we went and we had an ice cream together on Rondebosch Main Road, and we had a bit of fun walking on the road and singing songs and being silly. And when he dropped me off at my university residence, he leaned in and he gave me a kiss. 2 seconds. Best 2 seconds of my life. And that was the moment when he said, be mine, Lakah. It's a moment that I understood. It's a moment I think you would have understood. And certainly the Hebrews, if God said to them Lakah, they would have understood what it meant. And so in Exodus 6, we're now right at the beginning of the Hebrew nation. They've just been released from slavery. God has rescued them out of 430 years of slavery with the Egyptians. They've come out of Egypt. only recently, the Passover, when they were rescued, was 50 days earlier. And so now 50 days since they've been rescued out of Egypt, they arrive at the bottom of Mount Sinai. No, not yet. They're still walking in the desert. We're going to get to Mount Sinai soon. They're walking in the desert in between in those 50 days. And God says to them this, Exodus 6, verse 7. I will take you to be my people. I will Lakah you to be my people. And I will be your God, and you shall know that I am the Lord your God, who has brought you out from under the burdens of the Egyptians. So now these people don't know God very well. What they do know is that there is a God who is obviously extremely powerful because they've been in Egypt and understanding the Egyptian gods, and their God has just defeated every single one of the Egyptian gods with the 10 plagues. They've been completely annihilated. And so they now know that apparently they belong to this new God. They don't know what he's like. They don't know why he's rescued them. They don't know if they've gone from bad to worse. And so they're walking in the desert, tentatively getting to know this rescuer who could be another slave driver, could be another oppressor, could be another cruel God wanting to own them, hurt them. They don't know. And so in this moment is the first clue that they get when God says to them, Lakah. And you can imagine them being a little bit taken aback and thinking, Lakah? I'm getting romance vibes. Is that what am I getting what you're giving? Is that what you're trying to say to me? This is not an ownership. This is not you've rescued me and now you own me. This is an invitation to be yours. This is you saying, I'm yours, will you be mine? This is a whole nother thing that's happening. And so that is the first indication that the Hebrews have, that these rescued slaves have, that maybe they've got it good. After that, if he's asked them to be mine, just how much do they belong to him? How precious are they to him? What they would have been wondering is, will he take it to the next step? Will he go from Lakah to phase 2 of a relationship, which is Segullah? Now, Segullah would mean you are the one. In today's language is, I'm locked in, like you my girl for life. I'm never going to leave you. This is the one. You are my treasured possession. It's not just be mine, but be my only, be my forever, is the kind of thing that Segullah means. So again, for me and Richard, this is a few weeks after the first kiss, and Richard knows that with most terrible music taste that I have, I love Elvis and Beatles and all the things that my father introduced me to. And so he takes me to a big show at the Playhouse in Cape Town called the Elvis Extravaganza. Now, we're the only ones there without grey hair. Everybody else is 20 years older than us. I'm having the time of my life. And it's 1, 2, 3 o'clock, 4 o'clock rock. And we're singing. And we're supposed to be in these plush, fancy seats. But the whole audience is up. And it's nothing but a hound dog. And we sing, and I can't help falling in love with you. Oh, wow. He has got me, boy. This is a whole nother level. And I'm all buttered up. And he takes me out to a Chinese restaurant. And we get fortune cookies at the end of the meal. And we break the fortune cookies. And it says absolutely nothing what we're trying to say. But we just twist the words to mean Segullah. Will you be mine forever? Will you be my treasured possession? And he looks at me for the first time and says, I love you. And that's what the Hebrew slaves were wondering. Have we gone from slaves to worse, or are we on the right track here that Lakah might be ending up in Segullah? And it is. Exodus 19, couple of chapters on, we read in verse 4, you yourselves, he's buttering them up first, letting them know what he's done so far. You yourselves have seen what I did to the Egyptians, how I bore you on eagle's wings and brought you to myself. I've got credit with you, right? Now, therefore, if you will indeed obey my voice and keep my covenant, this is a choice. They don't have to be his. He's saying, if you would like to, if you choose to obey me, if you choose to obey my covenants, if you choose this relationship, then you shall be my Segullah, my treasured possession. Among all the peoples, out of all the nations, I will choose you. You are the one. And so once again, these Hebrews are amazed. They've never met a God like this. In fact, they've never met anyone like this. They've never been treated by someone in power, someone who is able to hurt them in any other way other than to hurt them, other than to oppress them, other than to abuse and use and get whatever they to be exploited by them. And here, this God who is clearly all-powerful is choosing instead to invite them into a choice of a treasured relationship, a romantic marriage partnership kind of relationship. This was a world-changing experience. Would God take it to the next level? So phase 3 of a traditional Hebrew relationship would be the mikveh. So what that would mean in today's day and age is when a Jewish boy loved a Jewish girl and he'd asked her to be his treasured possession, if he wanted to propose marriage to her, he wouldn't surprise her. Not like Richard and me and just taking it, I've got no idea, so I'm dressed in these awful dungarees that really nobody should go out in and I'm totally unprepared. No, a Jewish boy would give her a little bit of a heads up. He would say to her, mikveh. Go and wash. Go and get ceremonially clean. Go and get ready for this moment. Because when I propose to you, I want you to be able to be close to me. I don't want you to be in a situation where you're not allowed to be touched. I want to be able to come close to you. The boys these days do it. They give the girl a manicure voucher, then you know. If you send me for a manicure, my hand is about to be insta-famous because that ring is going to be photographed and put all over social media. And so there's a little bit of a heads up, and that would be what a boy would do to a girl. God does this to them. He says to them, in 3 days' time, it's going to be a special day, wink, wink. Go wash. Exodus 19 verse 10, the Lord says to Moses, go to the people and consecrate them today and tomorrow and let them wash their garments and be ready for the third day. 3 days after a girl was told it's time for a mikveh, she knew there would be time for a proposal, for a ketubah, for that moment to arrive. Well, 3 days after this nation is told to prepare themselves and consecrate themselves and wash themselves, that's the day that they get the 10 Commandments. So that's why they know that this is not a bunch of rules. This is not an oppressive Lord telling them what to do. On the contrary, this is an invitation into a kind of marriage for the future. So ketubah would be a combination of what we would do with a prenuptial contract. Before you get married, you would specify with some legal stipulation to the kind of marriage that you're entering into, as well as the vows that you would say on the day. I promise to do this, you promise to do that. It's an agreement of how you're going to be married going forward. What would it look like? What kind of home are you going to build? What do you commit to with each other? And probably the primary, I read and I've learned that the primary reason for a ketubah would be to protect the bride. So in the ketubah would say, if the husband divorces the bride, he would already set right what the divorce settlement would be, so that she knows she's coming into this and she's safe, she's protected coming into this marriage, coming into this agreement. And this would be done with a Jewish family. It wouldn't be just between the boy and the girl. This would be between the families. The fathers would sit at the table together with the couple that were making the agreement, and they would get to put in whatever they wanted, whatever kind of home they wanted, and they would come to a mutual agreement. And once it was all settled, they would get up, and now because she's ceremonially clean, he is able to embrace her, and then he would say these words to her. I go to prepare a place for you, that where I am, you may be also. And she would say, well, when will you come back to receive me unto yourself? And he would say, I do not know the day or the hour. But when my Father approves the wedding chamber, he'll send me back to receive you unto myself. So the groom would then go off and build a place for him to be able to take his bride to. So when Jesus is using these words, the people know it's the proposal. It's happening. The time is coming where God is going to take us off into the wedding chamber. It's imminent. They know that Jesus is still about what God was about all those years ago. 1,500 years ago, on the very first Pentecost, when the 10 Commandments were given and God said, I want to marry you. That's the kind of agreement that I want with you. Jesus is confirming that. He's saying, that's still what I want. And I think sometimes when we use the words 10 commandments, we can think as Christians that maybe God the Son and God the Father are playing this kind of good cop, bad cop. Like Jesus come and saying, it's okay, it's grace, forget about what Dad said. But that's not it at all. Jesus is saying, it was always about the proposal. It was always about the marriage. It was always about the equal partnership. God, all-powerful creator of the world, wants you not as a slave, not even as just his child, but with him, next to him, as his partner, ruling the earth that he's created for you to enjoy. That's the kind of relationship he has always wanted with his people. And so the Ketubah, the 10 Commandments are given. And then the fifth stage of a Hebrew relationship would be known as the Chuppah. A little bit like hoopah, like that's the one. You're thinking of the right thing. So the bride and groom would come then when the place is ready under a chuppah, a canopy which would be put over them. And you've seen it at weddings, the flower arches or the beautiful fabric canopies that would be over a bride and groom as they commit to each other to keep the ketubah in front of everybody, as they kiss for the first time, as they go then into the room that he has prepared for her. There would be over the bed a chuppah, a canopy, the presence of God represented by that canopy as under his witness the marriage is consummated. And so how does this play into the first Pentecost, that moment where the 10 Commandments are given? Exodus 20, verse 1, the start of the 10 Commandments being given, says, God spoke these words, the 10-word ketubah, saying, I am the Lord your God. I'm already yours. I belong to you. And he ends the 10 Commandments in verse 18 by saying, all the people saw the thunder or the thunders and the lightnings and the sound of the trumpet and the mountain smoking. And when the people saw it, they stood far off. At that moment, they looked up and saw the mountain covered by a chuppah, consecrated under his presence as the marriage came to a conclusion, as he concluded his agreement, his proposal to marry this people that he had rescued. That was where God was always headed. Why do Jewish people think they're celebrating at Pentecost a proposal from God? Because this was how they read the scriptures. And so today, still, when they come to celebrate Pentecost, or Shavuot as they call it, they celebrate it like a wedding. They put a canopy over where they are worshiping. They put flowers inside the room, and they come and they celebrate as if an anniversary of the day that God proposed to them. That's what it's always been about. It's always been that God loves you. In this Yes series, we're looking at what is it God loves you? What is his proposal? What is he asking of you? And what will we say? Will we have stories to tell in the weeks to come of our yeses to the proposal of God? And so we've looked at why the Hebrews think that it was a proposal moment. Pentecost, which is then celebrated by the disciples all these 1,500 years later, and this incredible moment that happens again that we will talk about now. But the three questions we opened with is, when we are proposed to, we need to know, what is the proposal? What am I being offered? Who's making it? Can I trust them? What is their character? And then what happens if I say yes? How does my life change? What will it mean? What will I be giving up? What will I be gaining if I say yes to this proposal? So what is the proposal? In order to answer this question, I want to take you back in time. Let's go back to the year that Jesus was crucified. So let's pretend we are a Jewish person living out of town, and we've traveled in. We have a different language. Maybe we come from Parthia or Carthage or somewhere else, and we come in. We don't speak Hebrew or Greek or whatever they're speaking here right now. We speak a different language, but we've come because 3 times a year we're invited in to celebrate at the temple 3 big festivals, and we wouldn't do all 3 of them if we've come from far. We choose one in the year. So either the Passover or Pentecost, or later in the year, the Feast of Tabernacles. But we've chosen Pentecost. And we arrive in town, and we're so disappointed that we chose Pentecost, because all everyone is talking about is Passover. They're saying this year Passover, we think, was the year we've been waiting for. A lot of people are talking about the fact that at the first Passover, when we used to be slaves 1,500 years ago, we were told to paint the blood of the lamb on our wooden doorposts, and that way the angel that came to rescue us would know that we were belonging to God, we were putting our trust in Him, and He would pass over us, free us from our oppressors, and take us into freedom. That seems to have happened 50 days ago at Passover. There was a man who came, Jesus, who claimed to be the Son of God, the Messiah, the one we've been waiting for. And He went like a lamb, silent. He didn't fight back. He went and He allowed them to paint His blood on the wooden posts of the cross. And then 2 days later, on the 3rd day, He rose again from the dead. And you're starting to bump into people who have met Him on those days afterwards, because for 40 days afterwards, He's walking around, appearing to over 500 people, explaining to them what the proposal was all about, explaining to them that He's come to bring a kingdom of love, a kingdom where you don't have to be afraid, where you don't have to live in shame, and He is coming to initiate this proposal again, to invite people into this marriage with God. But the trouble is, He left 10 days ago. You've arrived at Pentecost, and Jesus was walking for 40 days, but it's now 50 days since Passover, and you've missed it. And it's so disappointing. But nonetheless, you go to the temple on Pentecost, and it's about 9 in the morning when you would be celebrating that, and the priest is there, and he's got leavened loaves, which is quite unusual, because in every other festival, every other sacrifice, they do with unleavened loaves. But in this one, they specifically use leavened loaves. Now, it was known to everybody that leaven was synonymous, a metaphor for sin, for the things in our lives that shouldn't be there. And so we don't bring it to God usually. But on Pentecost, for some reason, which we're yet to find out, if you're a Jew living in those days, on this day in Pentecost, we lift up the leavened loaves. And 2 of them, I wish I could lift them, but they're actually very heavy. I can't lift both of them. You lift up a leavened loaf, the priest would do this, and he would wave it before God, showing that one day we would be able to lift up our leavened lives with the mess and the brokenness and the sin. And one day when these were broken, He would pour oil in, and one day the Spirit would be poured out on our leavened lives. And not just for Jews, but 2 loaves, because it would be for the Jews and the Gentiles that this oil would be poured out. And you would be watching Him, saying the prayers, waving the loaves, waving our leavened lives, looking forward to the day that one day God would pour out His Spirit on all men. It had been prophesied that one day we would be under this canopy, and it would be the canopy of the final consummation of the wedding, of the Spirit coming upon us. And you would be looking forward to that day. And as you did it, in this temple, you heard the rushing sound of rushing violent wind, but you couldn't feel anything. It wasn't windy, and it sounded like trumpets. And you thought, that's strange, because on the Pentecost that we're celebrating 1,500 years ago, there were trumpets that were sounding, and it sounded like a loud wind, and it sounds just the same. And you would start to think, I wonder what's happening. And just then, down from an upper room come a whole bunch of men with tongues of fire above their heads, and you're looking and you're thinking, what is happening right now? Because these men have got fire above their heads. And not only that, but that guy is speaking, and I can understand him. He's speaking in the language of the land from which I come. And you're thinking, this is so much like the legends. It's so much like what the rabbis have been teaching us in the rabbinical commentaries and in the Talmud, where it says that on that moment, the thunders and the lightnings are better understood as voices. That word thunders, is a plural that everywhere else is translated voices. voices, tongues, languages in fire on people's heads. So reminiscent, so exemplary of what we're celebrating from the first Pentecost and from the first proposal. And you would realize in that moment that even though you'd missed the Passover where it all came to be, you're here on the day of Pentecost when the Spirit is coming to be poured on all men. What would you have done in that moment? Would you have gone across to the priest and said, those guys are a bit weird, they're doing something different, we don't normally do that? Or would you have gone running to say, is this the reality? Is this what's happening? Is this what we've been waiting for? The tongues of fire that were once on the mountain of Mount Sinai that came to say, God loves you, God wants to marry you. The voices in every language and every nation would have understood. Is today the day that the Spirit is being poured out? Would you have been among the 3,000 that were there not to see Jesus, never having heard of Jesus, but come from all over, suddenly hearing in your own language that you're invited into the story, that the Messiah has come, and that the Spirit is available to be poured out on you so that you too would be filled with voices, languages, tongues of fire, of power, to be able to not just receive the proposal, but give the proposal to the rest of the world in a way that they can understand. What is the proposal? The proposal is that God's Spirit would be poured out on our leavened lives, that He would choose to come in a marriage way, in a love way, in a partnership way into your life exactly how it is today. Secondly, the second question we were looking at is, who is making this proposal? What is this character? What is this God like? Well, you would have heard from your forefathers that the God who proposed the first time was unlike any gods that had ever been known before. Because this God, when He brought His 10 commandments, they were not receiving this as a bunch of rules, as a bunch of legalism that was confining them. On the contrary, remember who was hearing this. Standing at the bottom of Mount Sinai on that first Pentecost 1,500 years earlier was a bunch of people who had just been freed from slavery. For 430 years, they had been making bricks in the sun every single day. For 430 years, they had had no rights and privileges. They had been less than human. If an Egyptian wanted to kill them for whatever reason, he just did. There were no repercussions. There were no laws against murdering you because you weren't human. There was no laws against your wife being raped because she wasn't human. There was no laws to protect your belongings because who are you anyway? And so when you're standing at the bottom of Mount Sinai and you're waiting for this proposal that says what kind of home you're going to live in and what kind of marriage you're going to be invited to enter into, and you hear, if I'm the Lord your God, only me, then you get a day off once a week. I promise you, as a slave who's just been freed, you're not going, well, that's a bunch of legalism. On the contrary, you're saying, what? Every 7 days, we work 6 and then start. Are you sure it's not once a year? No, every week you get a day off, completely. Okay, wow, yes, I'm in, I'm signing already. What else is on this contract? Nobody's allowed to kill each other. Not even the strong people, no. The strong people are not allowed to kill the weak people, no. But what if they're in charge? Still no. Are you telling me that I have a right as a human being, that I'm worth something? Yes. Nobody's allowed to kill each other. No, even if you think they're slaves. And then you shall not commit adultery. But except for them, they can come and rape my wife. No, they can't. No, in the marriage contract I'm establishing, in the nation I'm establishing, this is going to be the best culture the world has ever seen. In fact, if you follow my rules, God says, if you follow my commandments, if you follow the contract that I'm putting in, your culture is going to be the best culture that ever was on the face of the planet, and that is going to be the very thing that attracts the rest of the world to come and accept my marriage proposal because it's for them too. And so when he writes, you should not steal, they're not going, oh man, I really like that guy's guitar. Of course not. They're saying my property is protected. It was all about establishing the best culture that the world had ever seen, and that was going to be the culture that the world would see and be invited into. When we live out our marriages, well, other people should want to get married. When we live out our relationship with God well, other people should want in. They should say, I want to be with that God. Who is that guy? Who is it that's making the proposal? It is the most powerful God that will ever be and ever was. And he is good and loving and kind, and he wants to protect you, and he wants to put back human dignity into your life, and he wants you to know that you are worthy, leaven and all, even with your stuff. And these people had stuff, because he also had to put things like, listen, don't sleep with your mother that way, that's not okay, and don't sacrifice your children. I mean, the rules he had to put in were quite hectic. Don't touch your poop. Don't do that. He would have to put in also, guys are not laughing a lot, eh? You're out there. He would have to put all sorts of things in there. These people had leaven in their lives. They were dodgy. But he chose them, and he said, Lakah, I want you to be mine. Segullah, you are my treasured possession. I'm locked in with you. You are the one. Go and prepare yourself. Go Mikveh, because I want to come with a proposal for you, and it's going to be such a good proposal. And then the Chuppah, the presence of God, will be over the rest of your lives. That is what we're invited into. The first Pentecost, and the Pentecost that was celebrated 2,000 years ago, and the Pentecost that we're celebrating today. That is the God who is proposing it. And so number 3, what happens if I say yes? Well, it's a good question. We do need to weigh up the pros and cons, as I had to do with Richard. Because when I chose to marry Richard, we were doing it in a traditional Christian way, which meant that I would give up my name. And he'd asked Jackie Mary Stott to marry him, but I would never be Jackie Stott again. And that was a big deal, because I liked being Jackie Stott. I was used to it. It was part of my identity. I enjoyed being identified with the Stott family, my family of origin. And there were other things I would have to give up, independence and all sorts of things. And but what I would gain, well, I would become Mrs. Richard Mun-Gavin, which is kind of sexy. And because I was Mrs. Richard Mun-Gavin, I would be able to sign his checks. And I would be able to speak on his behalf. I would be able to RSVP to events on his behalf. I would be able to say where he would go and where he wouldn't go. I would get to be partner with him and get to choose where his resources and energies would be spent from this day forward. And actually, I thought that's a little bit more exciting than being only independent and holding on to my family of origin. And it's the same when you choose to accept God's proposal. You will still have things that have formed you from your family of origin, of course, but you will take on a new name. With this new name comes the ability to sign checks on God's behalf, which is very nice to be able to do. As we read in, I don't know where we read it, but it says, whatever you ask for in my name will be done. So we get to do that when we are married to God. When we get to RSVP to events on his behalf. He says, if 2 or 3 gather in my name, there I'll be also. So if I want him in my workplace or in a situation that I'm in, all I do is I invite 2 or 3 friends, and all of a sudden I've RSVP'd for God. Here he comes into the place where I needed him to be. Those are benefits, friends. The most powerful God that ever was. I get to sign checks on his behalf and RSVP of where he will be. Prophesied for years before, and confirmed and come to pass in Acts 2, we read this. It shall come to pass in the last days, which was happening at the moment that they wrote this, says God, that I will pour out my spirit on all flesh. Your sons and your daughters shall prophesy. Your young men shall see visions. Your old men shall dream dreams. Friends, when we say yes to the marriage proposal, what we're saying yes to is those tongues of fire coming onto our lives, the oil being poured into the leaven of our lives, so that we get to go out into the world and speak in a way that the world can understand the proposal of God. We get to RSVP on his behalf. We get to sign checks on his behalf. We get to go to places and declare his proposal of love to others on his behalf. I say yes. Who's with me?